You probably already know this, but old stuff is like really popular right now. I first noticed this trend in the world of fashion, but it quickly started popping up in more and more places. Interior design, advertising, YouTube. Everyone in the creative industries seemed to be moving in the same direction. And at first, I thought this was just the typical cyclical nature of trends that we see throughout the years. However, I keep seeing it in more and more places, and I'm starting to think that something else might be going on. So, I did some digging. The current pace of innovation is dizzying. There's always some groundbreaking discovery. As this happens, I find myself more and more gravitating towards the past. I just find it more comforting, and I'm not really sure why. And I don't like not knowing why. So I started reading about how trends evolve. I found research papers and books. I read about old thrift shops and the creation of value from trash and design trends from the last 100 years and Macklemore, and that's when I realized this is gonna be way more work than I thought. And because of that, I decided to simplify my approach and turn my attention to figuring out where the idea of vintage even comes from. Which brings us to London in the 1960s. You see, it turns out that the idea of vintage is a product of the industrial... Wait, I know history is like boring or whatever, but I promise this is important, just please bear with me. The Industrial Revolution allowed factories to create mass-produced consumer goods. Before that, clothing was really expensive. Now that factory-made clothing is widely available and relatively cheap, second-hand clothing becomes associated with poverty. And in this weird social status game that we're all playing, wearing clothes that are associated with being poor isn't cool, so people stop wearing used clothes. That is, until the 1960s in London. Around this time, the UK is undergoing a shift. People are starting to appreciate the historical significance that their homes have, and with that, they begin to look away from all the shiny new home decor on the market, and instead develop a sort of alternative consumerism. Over the next couple decades, these things called rag markets start popping up. They're mostly a way for people to make extra money selling clothes during the recession. It's a side hustle. But there's also a rebellious aspect to it. At this point in Britain, there's a new emphasis on natural products, and a general move away from typical consumerism. I even saw one article that referred to how young people dressed at the time as outlaw fashion, which I thought was kind of sick. So wearing vintage clothing comes out of an inherently anti-consumerism cultural movement. A movement that would later be hijacked by big brands marketing their products with nostalgia. But over time, the line between high fashion and street style starts to get fuzzy, and the idea of wearing old clothes becomes more accepted. Eventually, this idea makes its way out of London, across the ocean, and into New York City. At this point, vintage is still pretty niche, and the articles about it seem to be kind of mocking it. But that starts to shift in the 70s. Wearing old clothing starts to become mainstream. People are raiding the vintage boutiques and consignment shops and thrift stores. Because of this shift, the media started asking people why they preferred old stuff over shopping new. And from what I can tell, there are really 5 main reasons. The price. I mean, this was pretty obvious. Secondhand stuff is usually cheaper than buying new stuff. Originality. When you buy vintage, you can be pretty sure you're not going to find someone else that has the same thing as you. It makes your thing seem more rare and therefore more valuable, and you're the one that had to work hard to find the thing. It's almost like its own kind of status symbol. The experience. Buying new stuff these days usually happens either in a big box store or online. Buying vintage comes with the search and adventure of finding that new thing. Quality. Because of the transition into mass production, the ability for larger companies to produce high-quality objects at those competitive low price points drops dramatically, so people start turning to older techniques and older materials to find something of good quality. And finally, authenticity. This one's pretty esoteric, but it seems to me that this is just a general sense of humanness. Mass production and large-scale consumerism feels really detached and robotic. So by turning to small shops selling objects of the past, you're able to connect with something real. Honestly, coming up with this list kind of felt like I'd figured it out. Like, these are the reasons why old stuff is popular. And yeah. But as I thought about it more and more, my mind went to some of the vintage stuff that I've seen for sale. And it turns out some old stuff is significantly more expensive than just buying it new. When I think about the value of an object, I'm tempted to think about that object's intrinsic empirical value. But in reality, objects don't really have intrinsic value. The value of an object really only lies in how a person, or lots of people, use that object. Value is constructed socially, through collective beliefs. And an object can be worth a lot, and then slowly decline in importance, until it's basically worth nothing, and then rise from the ashes more valuable than ever. Over the past couple years, there has been a massive resurgence in the popularity of film. There was a point where film was a technological marvel. In the 90s, Kodak was one of the most valuable companies in the United States. But when digital came around, people slowly transitioned. Eventually, film became basically worthless outside of some really specific uses. With digital being easier and cheaper, there was just no reason to use it, so the world just kind of stopped valuing it. Recently though, people are using it anyways. So much so that the price of film and film cameras has actually gone up. We're even seeing companies produce new film or film emulations to try and deliver on that same feeling. The point that I'm trying to make is that in, 2017, the demand for film was basically nothing. To most people, it basically didn't exist anymore. But today it feels like everyone is trying to capture the look of film. Just like the people in the UK in the 1960s that started caring about their architectural history, or the people in 1970s New York that started going to thrift shops, we've identified that there's something magical about film. So this technology is relevant again because the artistic style that happens to be popular right now drove it to become valuable in the marketplace again. But how does that happen? How does something go from being basically trash to being something that everyone seems to care about? Let's talk about rubbish theory. We can sort any object into one of three categories: transient, durable, and rubbish. The value of a transient object decreases with time. Its value is trending negative. This is most objects. The value of a durable object increases with time. Its value is trending positive. Owning durable objects is usually tied to social status, so people want durable objects. Now, rubbish is different. It has no value. Its value is 0, and it's not moving up or down. But every once in a while, we see an object go from a downward trend, from transient, to a positive trend, durable. According to rubbish theory, the only way for something to go from a negative trend to a positive one is by passing 0 first. So for a transient object to become durable, it must first become rubbish. Like the film example. Not just anything can make this move from transient to rubbish to durable. The durable category is associated with status, so naturally it has some gatekeepers. Rubbish theory calls these the high priests. They are the critics, the ones who decide what's in and what's out. In our film example, these are like people who have always evangelized film, or the collectors, people that put it on some sort of pedestal and make it feel a bit out of reach for everyone else. There are 3 other archetypes of the theory. First are the levelers. These are the people who flood the durable category and diminish the status that comes with it. For example, people that see using film as pretentious and unnecessary. The next are the losers out. This archetype is people who are squeezed out to the margins and are mostly unable to participate in the system. Think Kodak going bankrupt when digital took over. And finally, we have the individualists. These are people who do things how they want, regardless of what other people think is valuable. The individualists tend to be the champions of moving rubbish into the durables category, but they don't really do that on purpose. It's usually a byproduct of them following a creative whim. The types of people that are able to make the shift from rubbish to durable are representative of our culture's values. Right now, we seem to be at least partially valuing people that find importance in reusing old things, in not wasting, in vintage. I like to think of the individualists as artists. There's this constant pull on us as creatives to shift our creative preferences towards whatever new wave of creative material is becoming popular. But you can't catch a wave as it's already going by you. The real discovery here, for me at least, is instead of chasing trends, we should aim to create them. Rather than following the direction of the crowd, we should aim to stick with the direction that feels true to ourselves. That's how we aid in the creation of value. If not economic value, then artistic value, human value. I wanted to read this quote. I think it just kind of embodies what we're talking about here. It is easy in the world to live after the world's opinion. It is easy in solitude to live after our own. But the great person is one who, in the midst of the crowd, keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. I've been working on this video on and off for months, and honestly, so far, it's felt like I just can't make it work. At first, I thought maybe I hadn't done enough research, so I started doing more. But the more I added, the worse it got. I thought maybe it was my writing, so I spent hours on new drafts. Eventually, I started to think that this idea just wasn't interesting at all. Then one day, Journey came home from visiting her grandma with a cassette player. They'd been going through old tapes, and that reminded me of the old dust-covered tapes that I had sitting at my parents' house in my childhood dresser. So I went and got them. When you start going through old memories like this, you can never be too sure what you're gonna find.
Hi Tyler, this is Nana. We're going to read the story about the mouse baking cookies. Now when you hear this sound, that means turn the page. Did you remember to turn the page? Okay, on this page there's a picture.
There are a lot of reasons people long for the past. In my journey to figure out what those are, I've tried to look at it from as many different angles as I could think of. I thought if I took an academic approach, if I looked at the history and the economics, then I would find my answer. And I wasn't wrong in that. I learned a lot about why people care about things, but it's incomplete. This all started because I wanted to know why old stuff is popular, but only a specific type of old stuff is popular. And when I really think about the Goldilocks zone of what objects fit, it's the stuff from my childhood. When I think about why I'm drawn to old things, it's not because trends or economic value or anything like that. It's because these things tell stories. Stories about me and where I came from. Stories about the people I love. Stories about people I have never and will never meet. I think what we're really trying to do when we use an old film camera or decorate our house with decades-old furniture is bring back a simpler time that we no longer have access to. It's a way of dealing with the present while honoring the objects that built the sets of our childhoods.